Hi, everyone. My name is Adeo Resi. I'm joined here by Mirto Lalakos. Do you want to quickly just say hello, Mirto?
Hi everyone, great to be here. I'm Mirto. I'm a principal at VC Lab, and I work with a lot of the new and emerging managers who come through our programs.
Great. And so she's going to take you through a lot of the exciting lessons that we have about how to fast track your Fund One. And before Murto goes and gives you some compelling advice, she's been making some amazing posts on LinkedIn. So I'd strongly recommend you follow her. Maybe Domenica, you could put Murto's information in the chat. You can also follow me on LinkedIn. I post a lot about venture as well. But I think some of your posts, Mirto, are fantastic about, what's it like to be a venture capitalist? What are some of the things to expect with Fund One? Let me just set the stage a little bit, though, before Mirto gives you some more information. So, um, we're in an interesting time right now in the world. So there's a lot of chaos and turmoil. It seems hopefully to be settling down a little bit. And in these periods of chaos and turmoil, there's the tariff issues, there's the stock market volatility, there's global currency issues, and there's trade wars and actual wars and everything else. And in these periods of high volatility, high turmoil, this is traditionally the single best times in history to invest. So around 2000, around 2008, et cetera. And we've actually had two back-to-back tumultuous periods, one with the pandemic and now with, the various global crises that we're facing. And in these periods, venture capitalists that make investments tend to get the best returns. And there's a lot of reasons for it. Valuations are lower, right? There's more talent available. It's harder to build a startup. So if it's a little more challenging to build a startup in these times, like better entrepreneurs are kind of the ones that succeed, and worse entrepreneurs fail fast. And so you tend to have a better caliber of startup, and companies like Stripe, SpaceX, Instagram, Slack, Uber, these name brand companies were all born in times like right now. And investors, there were a lot of people, for example, just to use Uber's cap table, it was so difficult for Uber to raise money that a lot of unheard of investors were able to invest in that company and in some cases take a $25,000 investment and turn it into over $100 million. Right. So it is a fantastic time to be an investor right now, but it's not all, peaches and cream. The reality is it's also a very difficult time to fundraise from LPs, but it's not impossible. So while it's a great time to invest, it's a slightly more challenging time to raise capital. And what we're going to do, and especially talk about it today, but also in the VC Lab program, is give you the tools and techniques to succeed in raising capital very quickly. You will raise capital very quickly if it's a challenging market like it is now. You will raise capital very quickly if it's a easier market, but particularly in times when it's challenging, you need to have as many tools as possible to be able to close on capital quickly and start deploying quickly, right? Because in normal times it's hard, and in challenging times it's harder. So you need the tools in normal times, but they're quintessential to your success in challenging times. Okay? So I met a lovely manager yesterday at an event. She was like, "Oh my God, I wish I had known about VC Lab when I got started." And she just did a first close because I still don't know everything. And, there's a lot of things I want to understand. And I'm like, yeah, and one of the issues is there's some amazing managers out there that don't realize that we have tons of resources available to help you succeed, and it's all free. Okay. So let me leave you with a final point, and I'll turn it over to Murto to give you some tips on fast tracking your fund one. But let me just leave you with this, okay? We need more venture capital firms in the world today. It so happens that right now is a fantastic time to start them, but even if it wasn't a fantastic time to start venture capital firms, we need more venture capital firms in the world today. Why? There are tons of cities in America where there's literally no venture capital, okay? And they're big cities. Like Chicago has a small venture capital scene, but compared to the size of the city, it's misaligned. Go to places like Cincinnati or other places, and this is in America, there's nothing, okay? When you leave America, it goes from bad to worse, right? There's only a few cities in Europe that have a thriving venture capital, in all of Europe that have a thriving venture capital scene. And then when you go to places like Asia, it's like becomes even more scarce. And so lots of places in Africa have nothing. Lots of places in Latin America have nothing. Many great cities in Europe and other places in the world have nothing. And they're great entrepreneurs working on meaningful problems to make the world a better place everywhere, literally everywhere. And there's not a funding ecosystem to help those entrepreneurs almost anywhere. Okay, there are 20 top cities for venture capital worldwide. Number 20 is Helsinki. Okay, so there are way bigger cities in the world than Helsinki that are not on the top 20 list. And just to give you a sense of how big this issue is. So we need more managers in the world today funding things that matter and working to make the world a better place by backing entrepreneurs that are working to make the world a better place. We're not going to fix the problems with politics. We're not going to fix the problems with NGOs. We're not going to fix the problems with corporates. And I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer here. They just haven't fixed the problems. And we've had these problems now, in some cases, for decades. Okay. So we are going to fix the problems. The entrepreneurs working on interesting things and the managers funding them. I'm not saying that governments have no role. I'm not saying that companies and nonprofits and NGOs have no roles. They do have roles, but they have not delivered. So I hope they keep doing a good job as best as they can, and I hope they become more successful and do a better job. But at this point, we need to take the future into our own hands and change the world for the better ourselves. And the best way that I know of is to take a large amount of capital and fund a lot of ideas that are working to make the world a better place. And that's why we do what we do. That's why the program is free. That's why we work to help you. We do this because we think this is the best way to make the world a better place. And what we ask, there are two asks that we have for everyone that we help. Number one, you agree with our principles. And we publish our principles as the Mensarius Oath, and we ask that you share that publicly to show that you agree with the principles. That's number one. And then number two, if you have a great experience, we ask that you refer people. And our program's MPS scores range from 83 to 87. And our premium, we do formation and back office work, and that's actually a 94. So technically our MPS range is 83 to 94. So most people end up, I'm sure many people here today were referred. So look, we've got a lot of work to do. You are going to be on the front lines doing some amazing things by funding managers, being a manager, funding entrepreneurs that are changing the world for the better. And Murto is going to give you some advice on how you can fast track Fund One. But ultimately, everyone, if you come into VC Lab, Murto, myself, Mike, and a whole group of people at the VC Lab organization and Dessel Group, which is the parent company, will all be there every week, every day, trying to help you for as long as you need help. So I hope we can help you. Good luck. And Murto, over to you.
Thank you so much, Adeo. That was super inspiring. Hi, everyone. It's great to see so many of you here, interested in kind of launching a VC fund. So we're at a stage now with VC Lab where we're launching over 60% of the entire world's new venture capital firms, which is insane if you think of it. Like whenever I think about the scale, it's kind of mind-boggling. So we run 4 cohorts a year, and in the last kind of year, there's been over kind of 350 managers that have started kind of their journey of launching a new fund in each of these cohorts, right? So it's about 1,000 a year right now. So it's insane. So we have done this many, many times. We're actually now running cohort 17. We have admissions open for cohort 18. If there's anyone here who is interested in applying, you can do that now. But, we have a lot of experience in this space and we've done this so many times. We've seen all the hurdles of launching a fund. And so today I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about some of the initial steps that you might want to think about when you're kind of looking to start a fund. How do you want to think about it? How do you want to kind of approach it? What are the common mistakes you could fall into that can cost you a lot of time, a lot of money? And yeah, just so that you have kind of an initial idea. That said, I do want to make this as interactive a session as possible. So please do use the Q&A function of Zoom. So I see that a lot of you are using the chat, and that's amazing. Keep introducing yourselves there. Keep kind of connecting with each other. We love to kind of form a community here at VC Lab. But if you want to ask a question about launching a fund or anything kind of that we've said today, there is a Q&A section at the bottom of your kind of Zoom screen. So I want you to open that and to put your questions in there. For everyone else in the audience, go take a look at the questions that have been posted and upvote the ones that you want to see kind of surfaced here during the webinar. So we're sure to kind of get through the most popular questions. So with that said, let's kind of get into it, right? So obviously, a lot of you guys are here because you're thinking of launching funds, and a lot of you have either been entrepreneurs or you've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs and you know what the process of launching a startup looks like. And so I think this is kind of actually something that is for sure, on the one hand, helpful when you're starting a VC firm to kind of know what it takes to launch any other type of company. But sometimes it can get you into a little bit of trouble in the sense that whilst there's some things that apply, it crossover from launching any other type of startup to launching a fund, there's some things that don't quite, that if you kind of do them, it can impede your launch or it can kind of create obstacles in the way. So let's start with what is similar. So when you're starting any other company, the first thing that you want to do is validate the idea, right? Everyone's kind of like, don't go out and build a product, keep it in stealth mode for a long time, and then spend a lot of money and resource into it, and then launch it and realize that's not quite what the market wants. So it's exactly the same thing with venture capital. So when you're launching a fund, the first thing that you need to do is have the idea of the fund, and you start fleshing out that idea, and that's called a thesis, right? So it's kind of like your value proposition almost for a VC fund is your thesis. It's kind of a one-sentence statement that concisely explains and communicates to limited partners, and we'll come back to limited partners, what fund you're launching, what sector, stage, and geography you are investing in or you're looking to invest in, and why you are the perfect person to go after this opportunity. Okay, so that's your thesis. So, and this is kind of what we do, at VC Lab. The first kind of few weeks, we have everyone just kind of start working on their thesis. And I'll come back to this. But going back to kind of market validation, once you have a thesis that kind of, looks good, what you want to do very, very quickly is start talking to limited partners. And that's literally step two of launching a fund. It's step one, create a first version of your thesis. Step two is already starting to go out to your network, to potential limited partners, and talking to them about your idea for the fund, or the fund that you want to launch. And you tell them your thesis. You have a conversation about, why you're doing this, why you're so passionate about this space, whatever, whatever. And they'll give you feedback, right? And so you kind of start this iterative thesis loop, right, at the beginning. And you might be talking to some people in your network, you might be talking to some friends of friends who are interested. And what you're going to see is that through this process, first of all, two things happen. The first is that you start improving your thesis. So you start making it into a statement that really kind of gets people excited when they hear it. And then the second thing that happens is that people start getting really excited about what you're doing, right? If you're really kind of, if you've landed on a really solid thesis, you can, 1 in 5 people who you speak to might be interested in investing in the fund. So what you want to do is start kind of capturing, right, and kind of going back to launching a startup. What you then want to do is kind of create some sense of traction, right? So you're kind of like, okay, there's this idea. I've gone out to market and I'm speaking to potential customers about this idea. And then it's kind of like about generating traction. And so, for a startup, it might be kind of number of signups on your landing page, or number of people who have gone to try your product that's online or whatever. For venture capital, what you do is you have potential limited partners who seem to be interested in investing in your fund. You use what we call a PACT. And maybe we can put a link to the PACT in the chat for those of you guys who want to know more. But basically, the PACT is a non-binding letter of intent signed by NLP that's kind of, registers their interest for the fund, right? And so once you kind of start having these conversations with people, potential LPs in your first, second degree network, and they get really excited about your thesis, you're like, hey, that's awesome. Like, it seems like you want to, you want to be a part of this journey. So the next step in our process is, I'd like to have you, I'd like to reserve a position for you in the fund, and you can do that by signing the pact. It's got some slight NDA language and stuff like that. And so that's, kind of how you get started, right? And these pacts are your traction. And the more pacts you have, the more validation you have from the market that people are wanting to kind of back the fund that you are looking to launch. So we can kind of come back to these kind of two topics, and I want to talk a little bit more about, how do you put together a strong thesis? But before we do that, I kind of started off saying, sometimes it's good to apply how you build a startup principles to a VC fund, and sometimes it can kind of get in your way. So let's talk about the getting in your way part. A lot of what startups would do when they're starting a company is they're going to put together a deck, and they're going to start sending this deck out to investors and potential customers and stuff like that. So like the deck kind of is step one, right? In VC, that's almost kind of a side thought, right? Because at these initial kind of stages, what you wanted, your thesis is enough to start generating traction. Okay, your thesis is also going to be changing a little bit. And so your deck is kind of something that you'll use, a little bit later down the line, maybe at week 4 of your firm building, maybe when you've already started getting some commitments. And we actually know so many kind of managers who don't even use a deck. They fundraise for the entire kind of first close. So they'll get like maybe $1 to $2 million in commitments in those pacts without using a deck a single time, right? It's just through word of mouth, because you're talking to people who are in your first and second degree network. They know you. You've probably, you've worked with them before. You've gone to school with them. They're kind of like, they're in your alumni club from your schools or whatever. And they trust you. They've seen your work. They love what you're doing right now, and they just want in, right? So um, a lot of people kind of starting funds are kind of like, oh, I need a deck. And in the deck, I need this financial model. And I need to model out the whole fund. So I'm going to kind of spend a ton of time modeling out this fund. And then I need like a data room. I need to kind of have like this a folder that shows kind of everything they need to know about the market. And then I need all this research about why new funds are going to outperform the other funds and stuff like that. And so there's kind of like a tendency, what we see is that, people want to be over prepared before kind of starting to talk to LPs, but that's not really going to help you because your thesis is your foundation for the fund, and your thesis is going to be iterating slightly kind of during those initial stages. And so every time you iterate on your thesis a little bit, then everything you've done in the deck is no longer relevant, and you need to go back to your data room and stuff like that. So you do that kind of at a later stage, right? So yeah, the other big kind of mistake that we see is that, in kind of like a startup stage, this is not such a big mistake. And I think people don't really realize that you can get into a lot of trouble doing this. They're kind of like, oh, well, I'm launching this fund, so I'm going to set up the legal entities for it, right? I'm going to set this up as a legal entity. And this is probably the worst kind of mistake that you can make in this space. And the reason for it is that setting up the legal entities for a VC fund is not just kind of, registering a single entity like you would for any other type of business. You have to set up 3 entities. You have the ManCo, the GP, the LP. There's agreements that tie up all the legal entities together. And so first it's a much more complex structure, right? And the legal costs that are associated to kind of set these up correctly can be really steep. What you'll find is that you'll reach out, you'll kind of contact a lot of lawyers who will say that they will do this for you, but it turns out they've never really done this for a VC before. If they have done, they haven't done it properly, or they'll give you the wrong advice because a lot of people don't realize is that venture capital is a very specialized type of industry. It's a very specific kind of way that you set up the firm and the entities. The accounting even is completely different, right? So you'll go to an accountant, and it's not because they can do accounting for any other type of business that they can do accounting for venture capital. So you need to find very, very specialized vendors. But people won't tell you that they're specialized. They'll be like, yeah, I can do it. I'm an accountant, I can do it, right? And so what you risk happening is that at the very early stages of the fund, you spend so much money kind of setting up this firm that might be done in the wrong way. First of all, you've already spent a ton of money. They will make it more complicated than it needs to be, like in particular around the legals. And then in order for you to kind of change anything and make any amendments, you need to kind of keep paying these lawyers, and your legal fees are stacking up. And also, so you've spent all this money, you're kind of locked in with all of these vendors that you're managing to set up the fund. And then you start going out to market, and guess what? Like I mean, I'll give you this stat. 1 in 4 of all you remember I told you like there's about like in the past year we've seen 350 managers, so at least start every new cohort that we have. Only 1 in 4 in every one of those cohorts actually completes the program and gets to a place where they can do a first close. So the failure rate is very, very big in this industry, unfortunately. And vendors, whether they know this or not, they'll just be like, yeah, I'll set this up. Your fees are not going to be anything less than $50,000, by the way. And they're like, yeah, I can do this. and you spend all this money, and then you start going out to market, you see that people aren't really interested, you don't actually know as many LPs as you want, your thesis isn't very strong, right? And you spend all this money and now you can't do anything with it, or you spend all this money and then you have the commitments and you're kind of ready to go, but turns out you haven't set the things up properly. You need to start over. And we've done this so many times for so many customers. There's been customers that kind of like, have spent 150K setting up their firm. It's done completely wrong. And then they're kind of like, they scratch it all and they start from scratch. So it's a real issue, right? So if you are here and you're thinking of launching a VC fund, please don't set up any of the legal entities. Don't do like a fund formation or anything like that, because the way that it works is as follows. You do your thesis, you start going out to market, you iterate on your thesis, you will land on a thesis that converts a lot of LPs, right? And once you get to about $1 million to $2 million in PACTs, at that point, you can say there is enough, demand for the fund that I'm looking to launch. People actually want this as like LPs are interested in this fund. They want to invest in this fund. Now I can justify looking at the next steps of setting up the legal entities for the fund. Okay, so it's just a more scalable way of doing it if you think about it, right? So if you have $1 to $2 million in commitment, that's enough to do a very healthy kind of first close. And so what you do, you're like, okay, you start looking at back office providers, fund formation providers and stuff like that. And you start kind of building your back office a little bit and start to engaging those, those professionals to kind of help you out. So hopefully that makes sense. I want to talk to you a little bit more about some other kind of mistakes that we see a lot, right? So we discussed going out to limited partners and start fundraising for the fund through these kind of what we call PACTs that are hard commitments. The reason they're called hard commitments, by the way, is you have soft commitments and hard commitments. Soft commitments is when an LP says, you have a conversation with an LP and they're like, yeah, I love this. Yeah, I would totally, you ask them, would you be interested in kind of being a part of the fund? They're like, yeah, I'd be interested in being part of the fund, right? And what tends to happen, and we've seen this across, across 17 cohorts. You have all these LPs that are like, yeah, I'm interested, but they don't sign a pact, right? So it's a verbal commitment, which we call a soft commitment. When you do a first close and it's time to kind of convert all of these limited partners into kind of signed limited partnership agreements, right? So it's kind of like the formal way through which, the kind of legal way through which you admit LPs into the fund. Those soft verbal commitments will convert at about 20 to 30%. So only 20 to 30% of those people you spoke to and who's told you they're interested in coming into the fund, it's such a low percentage of them that actually end up coming into the fund. But when you use the pact, and this happens all the time, by the way, Adeo said, I write a lot about this on LinkedIn. I think one of my latest posts was about this. It's kind of like what all the different ways that limited partners mean no, but can sound like a yes, right? And you'll hear yes because you're super hopeful. You want people to kind of you think people are interested, but they're just kind of being polite, right? They don't want to kind of tell you a dry no. I don't want to be, a part of this. They want to keep a good relationship with you. They may want a little bit of time and kind of seeing how the fund goes. Maybe they'll come in at a second close. They don't want to be kind of like the first LPs to come into the fund. So they'll keep you kind of warm, right? But for them, if they don't sign a pact, they're most likely not going to commit. They're just kind of being polite. So what does the pact do for you? It screens out a lot of this noise, right? And I know a lot of you are VCs, and, I was a VC before kind of coming in and starting to run these programs myself. And you know this, right? Even VCs, sometimes you don't reject the startups. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but it's kind of like, well, you just kind of don't respond, or you're like, yeah, we'll see, you're too soon, I'll come in later, or you know what I mean? It's the same thing with LPs, right? It's kind of the signals are not always very clear. And so what does the pact do? It reduces this noise, right? So once you get someone, it's kind of your tool to see whether someone is serious or not, right? It's a non-binding letter of intent, but it still requires someone to put down his signature. And even if they know that it's not binding, they will kind of, they're less likely to do it if they're not actually willing to come into the fund. And so the conversion rate from a hard commitment, which is kind of like a signed pact, or it could even be like an email, like a written, statement, or an email or a text or anything like that, where an LP says, I, want to come into the fund for this amount, right? So that's a hard commitment too. Those can convert anywhere between 70% and I've seen 100% conversion on from PACTs to limited partnership agreements, which is insane, right? So once you have PACTs, you are a lot more confident that the LPs are actually going to come in. And even what you'll find is that even getting a PACT is quite challenging, right? So you'll probably need, if you have a really strong thesis, maybe 1 in 5 of every LPs is going to kind of come into the fund. You'll probably have, you'll probably have maybe like 30 LPs in a first close. So just think about like the number of meetings it's 30 times 5. So meetings that you need to have to just get like to a first close, right? And so you need to be having those meetings constantly, right? You need to be talking about your fund concept. And that's if you have a strong thesis, okay? A lot of people, when you're just starting out, you haven't quite found your thesis, your conversion is going to be much, much lower. And so you need to kind of start having these conversations, and you need to have many, many, many of these conversations too. So one of the things that we do at VC Lab, and this is kind of something that you can start thinking about. So if you want to start a fund, the best thing to do right now is to start getting back in touch with people in your network who you think may be interested in launching, in kind of investing in your fund, right? We had a new manager who just closed his entire fund a few weeks ago, and it was, something that we love to see because we've been working with this manager for a really long time. And he came on one of our events, and I was like, like how many LPs did you pitch to close this fund? And he looked at his pipeline. He had pitched 3,000 limited partners. And I think he kind of landed at like, I think the maximum amount of LPs that you can have is 100. So I think he landed at like 80 or something like that. So 3,000 LPs is the number that he pitched to, which is insane. And only 80% of them converted through to PACs and LPAs, right? So start warming up your network, start kind of getting back in touch with those alumni clubs and whatever past colleagues or friends that you haven't spoken to in a while, because here's what's going to happen. You're going to have to kind of exhaust your entire network in order to set up this fund. Going out, and now we're going to get to another big mistake that we see a lot, which falls under what we call general solicitation. So going back to starting any other type of company or startup, founders rely a lot on marketing and getting the word out there, and in finding very creative ways to get the word out there about the new product that they're launching, right? And so you're kind of thinking, right, I'm going to start a fund. I'm just going to, my LinkedIn following is very large. I have this huge kind of like newsletter that, a lot of people subscribe to. I have a lot of readers from. So I'll do a post on LinkedIn. I'll kind of get it out on my newsletter. I'm doing this big event at this big conference. I'll like kind of talk about it on the main stage. Well, turns out marketing for a fund that you're launching is completely illegal. It's completely illegal. It falls under what we call general solicitation, and it's kind of heavily enforced by the SEC and similar regulatory bodies around the world. In Europe, you could actually go to jail for general solicitation, and a lot of people kind of ignore that, and they launch a fund and they do a public post about it on LinkedIn. And in most countries, in like 99% of the countries, you are not allowed to talk publicly about a fund that has not fully closed. I'm not talking about doing a first capital call or a second capital call. I'm talking about fully closing the fund. So if you say I'm going to raise $10 million, you need to kind of close on $10 million and close the entire fund before you can go public about it, before you can talk about the thesis of the fund, before you can say that you're fundraising anywhere publicly, right? So this is super, super important. And a lot of people, as I said, a lot of kind of fund managers, they generally solicit and they put the word out there. They don't know that it's illegal, and they're like, oh, well, I saw such and such do it, so I'm gonna do it, right? And the thing that people don't realize is that, yeah, you can put a post up, but if you say you get LPs that way, probably nothing is going to happen at the start because you're too small for anyone to notice. But say you set up the fund and you actually close the fund, you deploy the entire fund, you start making returns, and these LPs that you got through general soliciting get greedy, for example, right? I'm just kind of like giving you a scenario, but it's a real scenario. And they're like, kind of getting a little bit greedy, or maybe the fund didn't do so well. So they're kind of like, ooh, I want to get more of my money back. They can be like, well, you know what? Like they generally solicited, and then you're in big, big trouble. We know like people who have actually gone to jail for breaking these types of laws when setting up a fund. So super, super important. You cannot start a fund and generate traction amongst LPs for the fund by publicly publicizing about the fund. Okay. And so and the other thing, is that it's also not the type of business where this kind of marketing would land well anyway, because your service is you're basically managing other people's capital, right? And so it's a very kind of relationship driven kind of business where you are talking to these high net worth individuals and maybe kind of some family offices and stuff like that. And you're developing these relationships and you're really kind of showing them why you're the best person and the best suited to go after this and fund opportunity. And yeah, it just kind of wouldn't sit well if you're just kind of like marketing this super publicly. Like these kind of like sophisticated investors wouldn't be interested in this kind of um marketing or kind of approach. Okay, so super important, do not generally solicit for the fund. That is illegal and it can get you into a lot of trouble. So, all right, I want to make sure that we get into your guys' questions. So once again, if you do have questions, put them in the chat and go and upvote other people's questions so that we can take the most upvoted questions and emerge them to kind of discuss them with you all today. But before I do that, I do want to say, if you are launching a fund right now or you're thinking of launching a fund, we have applications open for cohort 18. Okay, and so I want to tell you a little bit about what we do in the program to help new and emerging managers to set up their fund, in case you're wondering. So in the program, we kind of there's weekly sessions, so it's a 14-week program. it's you and a big cohort of super, super, super talented individuals from around the world also launching their funds. There are weekly sessions and workshops that you get to attend. These are run by the world's top experts of launching VC funds, right? So you will be hearing from kind of we talked about fund modeling, the best kind of fund modeling experts out there. We talked a little bit about, legal and accounting. You're going to hear from the best in that space as well. We host office hours, so you can come and talk to these experts kind of in much smaller groups. There's some one-to-one kind of sessions that you guys can engage in as well. But more importantly, you're guided literally step by step through everything that you need to do to set up the fund, right? So we have what we call the curriculum. So every week you kind of get a new sprint that guides you through everything that you need to do that week in order to kind of progress to set up the fund. And the reason why this step-by-step kind of approach is super important here is because of the types of things that we discussed just earlier, right? So there's things that you can do. There's kind of like these missteps that you can take. So for like hiring a lawyer or forming the fund before you have commitments, right? It's going to cost you so much money and so much time. So we have done this so many times before. We know exactly where the gaps are and where the pitfalls are, where you can kind of mess up. And we guide you through in the right order every step that you need to take in order to successfully launch a fund without wasting a ton of time and a ton of money on like things that you shouldn't be worrying about at the wrong time and so on and so forth. So, yeah, so that's part of the program. We also, everyone who joins VC Lab has free access to Decile Hub. Decile Hub is currently the kind of world leading software for firms, VC firms, to run their funds. And you get this completely for free. There's so much of the functionality that's kind of, underpinned with kind of our LLM model. And it automates so much of this kind of activity that is required to kind of fundraise for a fund, to close and conduct a capital call, and then kind of manage your portfolio. So it's kind of the software that right now VCs have a tech stack that's, they have like Notion for this and HubSpot for deal flow and Affinity for portfolio management and stuff like that. And so, Decile Hub just kind of like brings it all into one platform, and you have access to that. There is AI kind of features that'll help you develop your fund thesis. It'll create your deck for you from scratch. It's going to go and find LPs in your network straight into kind of your LinkedIn account. It will identify people who can connect you to limited partners. It will write your emails for you to these limited partners. So you're going to put all the potential LPs in a pipeline. You have to kind of set it up that way, but you can set it up in a way that it does the whole drip of emails and follow-ups. It will obviously, translate your emails if your LPs are not kind of native English speakers. So it's insane. The tool is so powerful, and it's built by the community, basically, right? So the community of VCs who we were helping to accelerate were like, hey, we need a tool that does this, 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 this. It's been kind of like 3 years that we've been developing it, and it's developed by the community for the community, right? So it's purpose-built kind of software to launch a VC fund in a very short amount of time. We actually did an analysis the other day. My colleague Misha, who is, a PhD and kind of looks at all the metrics and analytics and stuff like that, he did an analysis and saw that the fund managers that use Hub more actually fundraise at a much faster pace than fund managers who use it less. So anyway, just kind of gives you a sense, but it makes sense because it just kind of automates the entire process for you. So with that said, let's turn it over to questions now. But yeah, if you are interested in cohort 18, we'll put the link in the chat for you guys to apply. If you have applied, by the way, to the program, please make sure that you complete your application. We'll be emailing you. So as soon as you apply to the program, we're going to be emailing you with kind of like where you are in the process. Keep an eye out on your inbox. Make sure you don't miss any of our emails going into spam. You want to white label our email address as well. So make sure that you keep an eye out for the emails and that you complete your enrollment process as fast as possible, because what we're going to do is as soon as next week, we're going to start admitting people to the community. We're going to start hosting sessions. You guys are going to start networking with each other through kind of community events that we're going to be setting up. You're going to have access to Desal Hub a lot earlier, so you can really get a head start before the official kind of launch of the program. So I do encourage you, if you are interested in this, do take a moment to fully complete your application so you can be admitted into the community and start this process right away. So, okay, let's get into questions. All right, Akif is asking, for the most recent cohort, what's the range of fund sizes being raised? And in the very early phase of starting to test the thesis, how typical is the fund size, set or flexible? Okay, this is a really good question, Akif. Thank you so much for asking. So let's talk about fund size a little bit. Actually, this is another thing that we see a lot, similar to there's vanity metrics for startups. One of them being how much money they raise, right? And you guys would know this. It's similar in venture capital, and the color this comes in is what size fund I've raised. And fund managers are kind of like, if the larger the fund you raise, the better it is. In fact, that's not true. Okay. And with startups, we talk a lot about kind of like scalability, right? So you start small and then you iterate and you learn and you build, and you iterate, learn, build. So it's kind of similar with VC. You want to start small, right? You don't want to kind of start off with like this huge fund. You don't even have a team that you know is going to work. You're going to spend so much time fundraising, because even raising a $10 million fund is a huge we have like superstar, like people who are kind of like famous and have been in the space for a long time. They even struggle to raise a $10 million fund. And so we have a lot of managers who are like, oh, I'm not doing this for less than $100 million. And it's like, you will be fundraising forever, for years. And what happens is that you'll speak to an LP this year, and then you're gonna do what, like have them sign the LPA in like 3 years. It just, they'll be like, what, like what's happened during this time, right? So what you want to do is that you start small, so small fund size, kind of like a $10 million fund. What you want to do, and this is already a difficult fund to raise, so what you want to do is raise the fund, make as many investments as possible, start seeing markups on those investments, and then you go back out to market for a slightly larger fund too. And now you have a track record, you have kind of like investments that you've made that have been marked up. People are starting to notice you, so you go back out to market and you're like, okay, like I'm doing this slightly larger fund. The LPs know you have a track record, so you do a slightly larger fund. And then it's the same thing. Do as many investments as you can, have as many shots on goal as possible, start getting markups from fund 2, and then you go out to market for a slightly larger kind of fund 3. And what happens is that, it's kind of like this iterative process almost, and it's very scalable because you're just kind of like growing with your track record a little bit, and you start kind of figuring out kind of all the processes within the fund, such that when you do go out to market for like a larger fund size, like a $40 million, $50 million fund, you have everything set up, and it's really easy for you to kind of not only raise this capital, but also manage it successfully, right? And what people don't know is that some of the world's best VC funds and largest VC funds, such as Lightspeed Ventures, for example, one of the largest VC funds of our time, their first fund was like $7 million, right? So they all started really small and worked their way up. And so what we see is that on day one, a fund one manager who wants to, start with a much larger fund one in size compared to a fund manager that starts with a much smaller fund, like a $10 million fund. When you look, 5 years down the line, the managers that started smaller have a lot more in assets under management than the fund managers who started with a large fund, spent ages fundraising, kind of hardly managed to deploy the capital, have like all this follow-on capital that they need to kind of like manage. They don't have, markups in their portfolio. So you actually get, kind of in the medium to long term, are much better off in terms of assets under management if you start small and kind of take this scalable approach. So, and then in terms of the flexibility of the fund size, Akeef, so that's kind of the second part of your question. Look, you can kind of go back and forth on your fund size. You kind of at the earlier stages of raising a fund, you want to be you want to land on a number that you can achieve. The worst thing that can happen is you not meeting your fund size target, right? So again, let's say you're kind of like, I'm not doing the, my fund size is going to be $50 million for fund one. And then you go out to market, you go out to speak to all of these LPs and you're like, I'm raising this $50 million fund. Are you in or are you out? And some people will be in and they may sign a pact and stuff like that. The worst thing that can happen is you under delivering on reaching that fund size target, because all of the LPs are going to be looking at you. Once they commit their capital, they're already conducting all this due diligence on you to understand, was it worth kind of investing in you? Are they going to come into fund two? Et cetera, et cetera. Was this a good decision? Should I introduce this person to my friends? Right. And so what happens when you told them, oh, I'm going to like go and raise this fund, and then you can't even raise the fund, right? And you like people are going to be super unhappy. You lose credibility completely. And so what you want to do is set a very realistic fund one target, let's say 10 million, even 10 million sometimes is a bit on the higher end. And we have kind of ways in which we kind of guide you to figuring out what the correct fund size is. What you want to do is set a realistic fund size target. And in the base case, you will hit that fund target. And in the best case, you're going to oversubscribe. And in that case, you're kind of the hero. It's kind of like, oh, he said he was going to do this. He like over delivered. Akeef is great. He's amazing. Everyone, you should you know what I mean? So that's kind of how it goes. Awesome. Nizar, I hear some fund managers raising from family offices. What's a good way to extend one's network of family offices? Nizar, that's a really good question. The thing that you need to know about family offices, like there's some that will invest in fund ones, but in general, kind of, non-individual high net worth investors, you will have a hard time fundraising from them in fund one, because a lot of these types of funds, most family offices included, they require a level of due diligence on your fund that you cannot meet because the fund does not exist yet, right? And so some are even prevented by charter in kind of investing in fund one. So it's kind of like fund ones, no, we don't do that. But yeah, you just kind of are required to show so much that you don't have, and track record and stuff like that. And you can't even use your personal track record. If they ask you, what's your track record? Your personal track record is not the firm track record. So technically it's not, you can't really use it for this type of due diligence. So what new fund managers do with family offices, because your question is how do you kind of, and kind of meet more family offices, is that it's kind of word of mouth. You'll start kind of meeting them at events that you go to, or maybe kind of through your LPs and so on and so forth. But what happens is that, or, introductions, what will happen is that they are kind of, if you look at your LP pipeline as a sales pipeline, they're kind of like a long-term lead. They're not leads that are going to come in straight away. They're most probably not coming into your first close. They may probably not in fund one. They may come kind of towards the end of fund one once they've seen like, okay, this fund is going to close. Usually they come at fund two, fund three, etc. So you kind of want to see family offices as relationships that you want to start building and nurturing and who require a lot of time before they actually commit into the fund. All right. So, how does one quantify track record without traditional VC experience? Question by Grace. So, yeah. Um, Obviously, it helps if you have an investment track record and you can show markups and stuff like that. But it's definitely not the case that this is the only type of track record that will be sought after by LPs. Okay. What we're seeing is that there's a lot of other types of track record, and maybe Domenica, we can put the article for kind of the secret sauce and the track record into the chat for those people who want to learn more. There's people who, LPs, it's always about kind of, you want to look at it from the perspective of the LP. LPs care about three things. Do you have good access to deals? So do you have a kind of unique source of deal flow where you find these really high quality, top-notch founders that they don't have a way to get into? They're going to look at, are you a good picker? So, once you have kind of deal flow, are you able to spot and invest into the winners? And then they're going to look at, are you the type of person that can help companies get from point A to point B, right? And so your secret sauce, so when you're talking about why you're uniquely qualified to kind of invest in a given space, this is the type of thing that you want to be thinking about. And so when we talk about access to deals, this is actually a very strong example of kind of like secret sauce or edge that you would have in a given market, right? So for example, maybe you're in Harvard, or Stanford, and you're, running an accelerator there, or you ran an accelerator at Stanford, and you have all these LPs kind of on the East Coast who don't have direct access to Stanford, but they want to be investing in Stanford deals. So they're kind of going to be like, oh, well, it doesn't matter that you haven't invested in those spaces before. It matters that you have access to this type of high quality founders. And I just said Stanford as an example, but it could be anything. It could be like a hacker community. It could be this like women founder private club. Like it could be anything, right? As long as you kind of have really high quality deals to come out of that. So hopefully that helps everyone. Oh my God, we reached the top of the hour. So thank you so much for being here. This was an amazing discussion. Great questions in the chat as well. And I'm hoping that I'm going to be working with some of you soon, helping you guys to launch your fund. So with that, have a wonderful rest of the day wherever you are in the world and see you at the next event. Bye.